And good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Daily Debrief. An arrest today in the case of nearly a dozen bombs sent to top Democrats, party donors, and to a CNN analyst. 56-year-old Cesar Sayoc of Florida is in FBI custody tonight, facing 5 federal charges. The 5 charges are interstate transportation of an explosive, illegally mailing an explosive, threats against former presidents, threatening interstate communications, and assaulting current and former federal officers. The charges carry a total possible sentence of 58 years in prison. CBS News reports that Sayoc's DNA is on at least one of the devices addressed to the Obamas, the Clintons, former Vice President Joe Biden, and party donor George Soros, and others. Images of Sayoc's vehicle dominated the news today. Its windows were covered with pro-Republican, anti-Democrat, and anti-CNN images. Florida voter records indicate Sayoc is a registered Republican. With us tonight is attorney Aiton Goelman, former federal prosecutor, current criminal defense attorney. He represents high-profile clients, including individuals such as FBI agent Peter Strzok. Attorney Goelman, thanks for joining us on the Debrief tonight.
Thanks for having me.
So this was a hefty list of criminal charges, but authorities said there might be more coming. As a former federal prosecutor, if you were writing up an indictment, what else might you be looking at?
Well, earlier in my career, I was one of the prosecutors on the Oklahoma City bombing case. And in that case, Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols were both charged with conspiracy to and attempting to and actually using a weapon of mass destruction, which is a federal crime. So I think a bomb does qualify as a weapon of mass destruction, including the pipe bombs that were apparently assembled and mailed in this case.
You know, possibly a terrorism charge related here as well. We don't see that on the list.
No, I think that's probably true. I think that this would fall squarely within the legal definition of terrorism.
So the first charges, assuming there may be more, were filed in the Southern District of New York. The defendants in Florida, other scenes are elsewhere. What's the best venue for this case? Is this going to stay a New York case?
I think it will stay in New York. I mean, the Southern District of New York has a lot of experience prosecuting terrorism cases, from Ramzi Youssef to the Blind Sheikh, a lot of al-Qaeda cases, and also some domestic terrorism. So they've got a lot of expertise there. And I mean, one consideration about bringing a terrorism case in New York is that they have not been successful in getting the death penalty, even when they've sought the death penalty against terrorists. And but this guy, hasn't killed anybody, so the death penalty wouldn't be an option anyway. So there's no reason not to bring it in New York.
Exactly. Let's talk about the suspect here. He appears to have a criminal record, including some drug possession, battery theft, one 2002 case attracting attention because it appears to be a bomb threat. So how might authorities be using that information?
Well, I don't think that information will actually be admissible in a trial, but it's certainly interesting background and can help them investigatively to identify a suspect. It sounds like the forensic evidence is pretty compelling here. I mean, you've got, fingerprints, and I don't know whether or not they've gotten like explosive residue on the guy's clothes, but they should be able to make a pretty compelling case that this was the guy. And then obviously you have all of the political rantings, which you can use to show a motive to target CNN and President Obama or whoever else was targeted, Joe Biden.
Exactly. Look, a previous attorney for Sayoc today said, and I quote, he wasn't always in his right mind. Your reaction to that?
I guess there could be a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. I mean, it definitely sounds like this guy is unsettled. I'm not sure whether or not he would meet the legal definition of not guilty by reason of insanity, which is that you can't tell right from wrong. But obviously he's not, there's something not quite right with the guy, to put it mildly.
Yeah, I mean, it raises an interesting legal question as to whether he thought it was somehow right in his own mind to do this. We'll have to wait and see if his defense goes that way. But look, the Attorney General himself said this afternoon that his office will prosecute anyone who violates the law, regardless of political persuasion. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I mean, the Attorney General is absolutely right. And, whether it's this guy sending a bunch of bombs to prominent Democrats or the other whack job who shot Congressman Scalise, was apparently a Bernie Sanders supporter. I think the federal government has got to come down very hard on instances of political violence.
We've got a little bit less than a minute to go here in our conversation. Where do you think this will go from here? Just open-ended, from an open-ended standpoint, what should we expect next?
In terms of the investigation of these particular bombs?
Yes, this individual, this case, where do we go?
They'll want to know if he had any help. They'll want to know, how he learned how to assemble bombs. They'll want to learn if he told anybody of his plans, and to see if he acted alone or not. I mean, the kind of sad, scary fact is that it doesn't take a whole hell of a lot of expertise or even effort to assemble a bunch of pipe bombs.
Attorney Aiton Goelman, really appreciate your perspective here. Current defense attorney, former federal prosecutor with the Southern District of New York. We really appreciate your insight here on the Daily Debrief.
Thank you.
For updates now on other incidents making headlines across the country, here is Anthony Velez.
Here are today's top crime stories trending on Law&Crime.com and across the country. A woman in Arizona accused of drowning her 1-month-old son in a bathtub reportedly did more than 100 internet searches on ways to kill an infant. 19-year-old Jenna Falwell was arrested after initially lying to investigators about the death of her infant. Authorities conducted a search of her phone and found over 100 searches for how and why to kill a baby. That's when Falwell reportedly confessed to getting into a bathtub of water and letting her son drown. Falwell remains jailed on a charge of suspicion of first-degree murder. An Army staff sergeant in Virginia was spared from the death penalty after a jury deadlocked during his sentencing for the fatal shooting of his wife and a rookie police officer on her first shift. 34-year-old Ronald Hamilton of Woodbridge was convicted of capital murder for the killings of his wife, Crystal Hamilton, and Officer Ashley Gwindon in the family's home in 2016. The jury was split 6-6 on whether to execute Hamilton, and he will now serve an automatic life sentence without the possibility of parole. A 20-month-old infant in Mississippi found stabbed and burned inside an oven was still alive when her grandmother allegedly placed her inside the oven, according to the coroner's report. The infant, Royalty Marie Floyd, was found dead in the oven after authorities were called to the residence in Shaw. The grandmother, 48-year-old Carolyn Jones, allegedly stabbed the child and baked her body in an oven. Jones now faces a charge of first-degree murder. Those were today's top crime stories. I'm Anthony Velez for the Daily Debrief.
Now to the trials we're covering on the Law and Crime Network. We expect opening statements Monday in the case of an Iowa man accused of murdering his own 4-month-old son. 28-year-old Zachary Cohen faces trial over the death of little Sterling. Wife Cheyenne Harris faces the same charges as her husband. She will be tried separately. Authorities found the little boy's rotten body infested with maggots. A medical examiner said that the child died from a, quote, failure to provide critical care. We are also waiting for the death penalty phase to begin in a Texas murder trial. Let's break down the key players one more time in this complicated case. Dallas area dentist Kendra Hatcher died in what prosecutors described as an execution-style shooting in September 2015. Authorities say Hatcher was dating this man, Ricardo Paniagua. The problem was his jealous ex-girlfriend. That ex-girlfriend was Brenda Delgado, and authorities believe she was the mastermind who hired the current defendant, Christopher Love, to rob and kill Kendra Hatcher. Jurors convicted Love yesterday. On Monday, they will begin to decide his punishment, either death or life in prison. Crystal Cortez admitted to being the getaway driver. She pleaded guilty and testified against Love. During closing arguments, prosecutors pointed to a recorded phone call where the defendant admitted he should have disposed of the murder weapon.
That by itself lets you know that this man is the shooter. I could sit down right now on that alone, and that lets you know that this man is the man that walked up to Dr. Kendra Hatcher and shot her in the back of the head. But there's more to it than that. You know that he's part of the plan. The evidence in front of you is that they meet the middle of August in approximately a 2-week time span. There are 111 texts or calls from him to Crystal Cortez. 111. Crystal calls and texts to him, 49. 111 to 49. Who seems to be the person eager to do this deal? That man right there.
Defense shifted the blame toward the co-conspirators.
You cannot find the defendant guilty upon the testimony of Crystal Cortez unless you first believe that her testimony is true. You must first believe her testimony is true. And that is where the state has problems in this case. Because we've heard the stories. We have two divergent stories about how this occurred. It's a little unusual in a capital murder case where we go almost a day and a half of testimony before you ever hear the name of the defendant brought up in this case. You heard from a lot of folks that have never, I asked a couple, have you ever heard the name Christopher Love? No, I don't know nothing about none of this. But you heard the backdrop of Brenda Delgado. Brenda Delgado was in the process of trying to find somebody before she even met Crystal Cortez. Crystal Cortez is in here saving her butt. Saving her butt in the fate that she deserves.
You heard the defense complain right there about Crystal Cortez. She pleaded guilty, accepted a 35-year sentence, admitted her role in the plot, and named Christopher Love as the trigger man.
Were you an integral part of the planning of this offense?
Yes, I was.
Were there ideas or things about how this should happen that were your ideas?
Yes.
Such as?
Putting the gloves on, finding the weapon, pretty much following Kendra Hatcher. Probably 2 weeks after I met Brenda, we started planning this murder. We would follow Miss Kendra. We would stake out her apartment. We would sit in the parking garage. We would follow her from her job to her house. We pretty much just found out her daily routine. One of the plans were to inject her with the needle. Another plan was to shoot her directly, and another plan was to kidnap her.
And did Mr. Love have a plan that he preferred?
He pretty much said that it would be easier just to kill her with the gun.
Here for analysis is attorney Marni Joe Snyder. Marni, welcome to the Debrief.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Okay, so the penalty phase of this case begins next week on Monday. What can we expect there?
So the prosecution has to first prove an aggravating circumstance, or two or three, for the jury to consider the death penalty. Then the jury is going to consider whether or not Mr. Love presents future dangerousness. So is there a probability that he would commit criminal acts of violence in the future that would put society in danger? If they determine that that's a yes, then they're allowed to determine all of the mitigating circumstances that the defense can present. And the defense has a lot of leeway in what they can present as something that is mitigating and should save Mr. Love's life. If the jury decides that there is no future dangerousness, then they don't have to decide the mitigators, and it's a life sentence. The jury also can decide to give Mr. Love life for any reason at all, and they are never obligated to impose the death penalty mandatorily.
You know, the state fought back against the defense claim that this was supposed to be just a robbery. The state said, hey, if this was a robbery, why did the defendant follow Kendra Hatcher for 2 weeks? Do you agree that evidence of premeditation is rather overwhelming here?
Yes, but they're trying to prove premeditation in order to prove him guilty of first-degree murder. Then they're going to use the murder for hire plot as an aggravator to say that this should be a death penalty case.
Yeah, that question.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say the question of punishment here is really interesting. If Brenda Delgado was really the mastermind behind this so-called execution, you know, and she's not going to wind up facing a possible death sentence because of this extradition agreement with Mexico where she fled. Is it wrong to then turn around and say Christopher Love should be the one who winds up getting the death penalty here?
Well, I definitely see the lack of fairness in this situation. And the lack of fairness in how the death penalty is imposed in places like Texas. However, that's still going to be for the jury to consider. It doesn't preclude the district attorney or the prosecution from moving for the death penalty in Mr. Love's case. The inequities are just something that the jury can consider here.
Appreciate your perspective on this very much, Attorney Marni Jo Snyder. Thanks again for joining us on the Debrief tonight.
Thank you for having me.
And still ahead tonight here on the Daily Debrief, the attorney for the woman convicted of kidnapping her husband's much younger lover, is speaking out about his client's rant about his performance at her trial. Plus, Megyn Kelly today off the air, and two Hollywood men say they're taking their fight over the president to court. We break down this week's celebrity legal news when we return here on the Daily Debrief. Welcome back, everybody. The attorney for a woman convicted this week of kidnapping her husband's mistress says he took the criticism in stride. A South Carolina jury convicted Tammy Moorer earlier this week. Moorer took the stand and claimed she was watching karaoke, having sex with her husband, and looking at Christmas lights when authorities say she was really kidnapping her husband's lover. At sentencing, Moorer lashed out at her attorney. This was his response.
First of all, I don't judge her for that. She had just been convicted. She was in a state of distress. She was in a state of probably shock. She was disappointed. She was disappointed with us, and she has the right. If that's the way she feels, then she can own that. I don't have a huge problem with that. It doesn't, hurt my feelings or anything. We're in there fighting for her, and other people can draw their own conclusions. As to all of the discovery that wasn't presented in the evidence, now that was one of the frustrations, for her, because so many people attacked her, so many people said things about her on the internet. People shot at her and her family as they were driving down the road. There was a police officer witness who saw that. I think somebody had shot at their house. They were just vilified in the community to the extent that they did have to move. People were doing all kinds of things that were coming on their property. And so she wanted that, displayed and played in court. But that's really not part of the case, okay? That's something else.
Moorer's attorney made those comments earlier today on the Law&Crime Network. He made it clear his client does plan to appeal. Time now for the Celebrity Debrief, where we take a look at incidents involving celebrities that have legal consequences, and many of them do. With me for that is attorney Jill Stanley, who is obsessive in the best sense of that term and making sure the rest of us know that celebrities are not above the law. Jill, good to see you again this week.
Good to see you, Aaron.
Okay, let's start with Megyn Kelly. Her future is in at least some degree of doubt after comments about going out in blackface as part of a Halloween costume. They raised a lot of people's eyebrows, infuriated other people. NBC said, look, it's going to cancel her show, moving that hour of programming back to a traditional Today Show format. So legally, NBC holds a lot of the cards here, right?
Yeah, well, certainly. Legally, there's a contract in place. She has an employment contract. She has a 3-year contract with NBC, reportedly at $23 million a year. She's about a year and 1 month in on that contract. So let's do the math. She's got about $46 million owed to her. Unless there is a valid reason for termination, full termination of Megyn, meaning you're off the network totally. Because right now we know she's off the Today Show, but she is not off the network totally. Unless there is a valid reason to fully terminate her from NBC, then they're going to have to pay a big chunk of this contract. Maybe not the whole thing, but certainly they are looking at millions owed to Megyn Kelly. So here's the issue. What is worth it to NBC? Is it worth it to pay her off and get this polarizing figure off the NBC platform, or can they find another home for her?
Yeah, that's the big question here. Is she going to go on to NBC News? Is she going to do something with a little bit more of a hard news edge to it? Is this just the loophole that they were looking at to try to get her out of this show in the morning that wasn't performing horribly well in the ratings?
Well, the show wasn't doing well. Everybody knows that. We know that Tamron Hall and Al Roker, who had the spot before her, who had a combined salary of less than even 1 year of Megyn Kelly's, were getting the same exact viewership and ratings. And by definition, are way more popular as human beings than Megyn Kelly. I do not think that NBC is going to keep Megyn Kelly on any part of their roster. This has been just a kind of maelstrom of mistakes from the minute she took that seat at NBC. There have been so many instances, so many unpopular viewpoints. I think NBC needs to wash their hands of her.
Interesting perspective here. Look, you know, a lot of these TV contracts, the ones that I've signed, the ones that I've seen have these moral turpitude clauses of some sort, and they're rather liberally construed at the whim of the employer. So interesting to think about from a legal perspective. I want to move on now, though, to this fight said to have occurred between Mark Burnett and Tom Arnold. Arnold says Burnett lunged at him and choked him at a party before the Emmys. Why? Because they disagree about President Trump. The latest news here, no criminal case, but possible civil options. What do you make of this one?
Well, let's be clear. They kind of disagree about Donald Trump. Here's the thing. Mark Burnett is the producer of The Apprentice, but he has gone on record to say he is, in fact, not a Trump fan. So these two are kind of on the same side in that they're both not Trump fans. What the contention here is by Tom Arnold is that Mark Burnett is in possession or has knowledge of some tapes where Trump has used racist comments and disparaging remarks about women. And actually, Tom Arnold had a show about that, The Hunt for the Trump tapes. And so he was looking for this and wanted Mark to turn this over.
Yeah, they're looking for this stuff. Okay, so then it results in this physical thing here. But now we've got this threat of a civil case bubbling up.
Yeah, well, the LA County DA's office decided, hey, we're not going to pursue any criminal charges against Mark Burnett, which is kind of interesting considering Tom Arnold said there was a video by a very famous documentary filmmaker of the fight. So clearly I don't think this video exists or nobody's turning it over. But there's nobody lining up to support Tom Arnold here. So no criminal case. So what's left for Tom? He can sue Mark Burnett civilly for assault and or battery. Is that going to happen? It might. Do I think that anything's going to happen ultimately to Mark Burnett? Is he going to owe any money to Tom Arnold? No, I do not think so. This case will not see a jury.
Well, okay, you know, fair enough. I just look at it and say, well, isn't that interesting? Apparently everybody has something to fight about these days. So anyway,
yeah.
Jill Stanley.
This is an interesting fight. Of all the fights that one could have, this is probably pretty low level.
Yeah, Jill, for the record, Jill Stanley and I get along. We have no disagreement right now. Jill, thanks a lot for the update. We'll see you again next week.
No disagreement at all.
Okay, that's all the time we have for today on the Daily Debrief. A reminder that Law & Crime will be streaming the trials we discussed live beginning Monday morning at 9 a.m. From all of us here at the Law & Crime Network and at the Daily Debrief, we really want to wish you a very nice weekend, and we'll see you back here on Monday.